أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله اشفعي لنا عند الله يا وجيهة عند الله اشفعي لنا عند الله. يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وصي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا سادتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله، فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله، فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله، وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله، فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا سادتي يا أولياء الله. صلى الله عليهم أجمعين، ولعن الله أعضاء الله ظالميهم من الأولين والآخرين، آمين رب العالمين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين، إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء، 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 أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. اللهم إنا نسألك وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم، يا الله 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 يا محمود بحق محمد، يا عالي بحق علي، يا فاطر بحق فاطمة، يا محسن بحق الحسن، يا قديم الإحسان بحق الحسين. انصر شيعة الحسين يا الله، انصر شيعة المؤمنين يا الله. اللهم اكشف هذه الغمة عن هذه الأمة يا الله، اقضي حوائج شيعة الحسين يا الله، شافي وعافي المرضى من شيعة الحسين يا الله. اللهم اقض حوائج المؤمنين يا الله، آمن شيعة الحسين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها يا الله. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج، واجعلنا من شيعته وأنصاره وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم كن لوليك حجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آله في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم أرنا الطلعة الرشيدة والغرة الحميدة واكحل أنظارنا بنظرة منا إليك. اللهم نقسم عليك بالزهراء فاطمة إلا ما جعلتنا من شيعة الزهراء ورزقتنا شفاعة الزهراء يا الله يا الله يا الله، لقضاء الحوائج ولشفاء المرضى ولكشف هذه الغمة عن هذه الأمة ولتعجيل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان، وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات لا سيما أرواح أموات شهداء البحرين والشهداء من المؤمنين والمؤمنات. رحم الله من يقرأ السورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على سيدنا نبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Inshallah, for this week we will be discussing and reciting verses 20 through 24 of Surah Yaseen. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين. اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. There came a man from the city outskirts, hurrying. He said, O my people, follow the apostles. Follow them who do not ask you any reward, and they are rightly guided. Why should I not worship him who has originated me, and to whom you shall be brought back? Shall I take gods besides him? If the all beneficent desire to cause me any distress, their intercession will not avail me in any way, nor will they rescue me. Indeed, then I would be in manifest error. For this week, inshallah, we'll discuss recitation speeds. Now, this is one of my favorite topics because it's something interesting and often many people do not know about this, and it's always fun or great to introduce a new topic into this. And the speeds which I'm speaking about really is the rate in which we recite the Holy Quran while following all the rules. You have three speeds: tahqiq, which is the slow recitation; tadwir, which is a more of a medium middle range; and hadr, which is a fast-paced recitation. The last few weeks, which I've been reciting, I recite in the tahqiq recitation speed or rate. And this type of recitation speed is slower, in which the letters of the verses, the chapters, the Quran can be recited in a way in which melody is more rendered. The rules are able to, in a way, flex their muscles, or rather have more flexibility to, and to show themselves off. This recitation speed is, usually recited in a more presentation format, in gatherings or in events, compared to other recitation speeds. And there's more involved because the way in which the melody is illustrated, you need to have the capacity melody wise to produce this recitation, or else it sounds very off tone, as we would say in musical terms, and because each bit of it needs to be thought out beforehand before you recite it. And after you spend time in this arena to listen to different different recitations or reciters, you slowly begin to build this capacity and to recite in this way. Then you have tadwir, which is the most common recitation which we know of. The recitation speed you probably listen to online during Salah, or in Mecca and Medina, when they recite in this, when they lead prayer, it's recited in this speed. And then you have hadr, which is a speed, very fast form of recitation. And I'll demonstrate the other two because the first style I've been reciting in the last few weeks, you're familiar with it. But this recitation, the hadr, the third one, which is a faster one, is usually recited in a way, the intent is to complete the recitation of the Holy Quran in a specific time frame, so they must go fast. Now, in all three of these speeds, the rules should not be compromised in any way, shape, or form. The rules still apply, the harakat still apply. Rather, we're just closing in on the amount in which a harakah is. We're defining it. Harakah is not 1 second or one, it's what you determine it to be, and you remain consistent during the course of your recitation. But you designate it to be a certain amount. Now, for tadwir, I will recite the verses for today in the tadwir recitation format, as well as hadr. From verse 20. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. this was tadweer. And now you're able to differentiate between them. And hadar, I'll probably stumble because that's not a speed which I recite in at all, to be honest, because I try to spend my time. It's a very rare occasion. You recite at this speed, and the more you recite the speed, you're able to, those who recite the Quran often and have a daily regimen, they can recite this, and they're more fluent at a faster pace compared to, even myself. It takes years to build this up, and inshallah we'll get there one day. But again, it's more of a specialty thing if you need to. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. So I'm not going to finish, but you get the idea of the three different speeds. And it's good to know this because, for those who wish to, spread their wings and recite in different styles and different speeds, this is another anecdote or piece of knowledge which they can add to their toolbox in order to become better reciters of the Holy Quran. Inshallah, that's beneficial. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining us in another discussion of the Tafseer of Sura Yaseen as we work on our tajweed and our tafsir of understanding the word of Allah. Today's discussion, we're beginning with verse number 20 of Surah Yaseen, in which Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. This verse talks about وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ, and then from the remote part, أقصى الْمَدِينَة is a remote part of the city, came from the remote part of the city, رَجُلٌ. Rajulun is referring to a common man, a man of not necessarily status within society. وَقَالَ and قَالَ يَسَعَى, he came hurried, running. As-sa'i is to run, which we do in Hajj. يَسَعَى رَجُلٌ يَسَعَى, that the man was running. قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ, he said, يَا قَوْمِ, O my people, O my nation, اتبعوا المرسلين, follow the messengers. Let's begin with this verse, and this opens up an interesting discussion. That it's referring, when we go back to the conversation that started with the story of Antioch in verse number 13, it's referring that within the people of Antioch, that when they belied the messengers sent by Nabi Isa, when they belied the disciples of Nabi Isa who had come to the city, that at that point in time that a man came running from the far part of the city to warn them against belying the prophets. This man who came running is known as Habib al-Najjar, Habib the woodworker, Najjar. His story is very interesting actually, and the next few verses are his conversation with his nation. Now, in researching the various aspects of conversations about Habib al-Najjar, there's a lot of important points that are to mention. So we'll take a few minutes to mention that this is a very interesting discussion that happens, and we'll start discussing what he's talking about slowly as we go through here. Habib al-Najjar, are the person, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى. This person is referred to as Habib al-Najjar. In his attributes, he's known as Mu'min Ali Yasin, that the place in Antioch where he was known from was known as Yasin, and he was known as Ali Yasin, the people of Yasin, and he was known as a Mu'min. And that our Holy Prophet explained that there are three people who never disbelieved in the faith of Allah, not for a second. Another narration says that there are three people in history who are the most truthful and have never lied or stepped away from the truth for even a second. And when asked, Ya Rasulullah, who are these people? He said, the mu'min of Fir'aun, who was his qeel, the one who helped Nabi Musa when the Pharaoh sent people to capture Nabi Musa, and he warned him that I'm your well-wisher, run away. This was his qeel. His qeel is the mu'min of Ali Fir'aun. The mu'min of Ali Yaseen, who is this Habib al-Najjar. And the third, the Holy Prophet says, is Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And in all of the narrations that talk about it, they say that, and the greatest of the three of them is Ali ibn Abi Talib. That these are people who never belied the faith for a second, or that they are the most truthful of all time. And the greatest of them is Ali ibn Abi Talib. So meaning this Habib al-Najjar is known as Mu'min Ali Yaseen, the believer of Ali Yaseen, has a great status. The story of this believer is interesting. Some narrations say that this Habib was someone who would spend his days and nights in worship in the caves, and that when Jibreel came and informed him of the coming of a messenger, that he believed in the Nabuwwat of Rasulullah 600 years before the Holy Prophet came. These narrations that talk about Habib as being a believer in Rasulullah, our Holy Prophet, and being someone who believed in his messengership long before he saw him, come to us from mostly Ahl Sunnah sources, that when they look at, for example, in the Quran, وَضَرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا أَصْحَابَ الْقَرْيَةِ إِذْ جَاءَهَا الْمُرْسَلُونَ. This Mursalun, some Mufassirin and some in the Ahl Sunnah madhahib, وَإِذَا أَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْهِمْ أَرْسَلْنَا وَمُرْسَلُونَ, they say that this has to refer to a prophet, because a prophet is the one who receives risala. So their opinion is to say that these stories starting from verse number 13 of Surah Yaseen are talking about Anbiya, not the disciples of Nabi Isa, because the disciples of Nabi Isa were not messengers, they were not prophets. So when they talk about Habib ibn Najjar, they say that Habib ibn Najjar was that person who believed in the Nabuwwat of Rasulullah 600 years before him. However, our Mufassirin and our ulama have specified that Habib ibn Najjar, and khususan this is coming from Tafsir Majma' al-Bayan. Tafsir Majma' al-Bayan goes into a little bit of detail and elaborates this story of Habib in a very elaborate and eloquent way. Now the story of Habib, and this is the caveat I'd like to explain before we get into this particular story. There are many different ways of narrating this story. There are many different mufassirin who have written different aspects of the story and different details of the story. My selection, that's explanation coming to you, comes from the explanation that's given in Majma' al-Bayan and the various ahadith that are similar to this that are reported by Alama Majlisi and Bihar al-Anwar. Now there's one significant difference between the narrations of Alama Majlisi and Majma' al-Bayan, and that's where the point of Habib ibn Najjar comes into place. And I'll tell you that as we go. Famously, the story begins that when the two messengers, or the two Hawariyun, the two disciples of Nabi Isa, were sent to Antioch, when they approached the outskirts of the city, they ran into this Habib. And Habib was an old man, and he says, "Who are you and why are you here?" He lived on the outskirts of the city. He saw many people, but there was something interesting about these two that made Habib ask the question, "Who are you and why are you here?" And they said, "We have been sent by the Prophet of Allah to guide the people to worship only Allah and not to worship the idols, and that we are the messengers of bringing guidance to the people of this community." So Habib says to them, he says, "Do you have any proof that what you're saying is the truth and there is one God and that you are the disciples of his prophet?" They said, "Yes. We have the ability to cure the sick. We have the ability to give sight to the blind, cure the leper, by the will of Allah, bi-idhnillah. If Allah permits us, we will be able to do these things." So Habib says to them, he says, "I have a son who has been sick for a very long time. Would you cure him for me?" And I said, "If Allah allows us to, sure, take us to your house. Let's go see your son." So Habib takes them to his house, and his son, who has been sick for a very long time, these two disciples of Nabi Isa, they come and they pray next to this sick person. And very shortly he gets up and he stands up and he says, "Baba, I'm cured. I'm perfectly cured." And Habib is surprised by this. And Habib turns to the two of them. He says, can I compensate you for this? What can I give you in return? You cured my grown son. My son was sick for a long time. You've helped him. How can I repay you? And this is what is written, was the secret, that what they did was after they cured his son, they said, we want no reward from you. The same way that the Anbiya would call out, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا, that say, I don't ask for it any reward from you. Habib heard these same words from these disciples of Nabi Isa, that we don't want any reward or compensation for the goodness of curing your son. In that instance, Habib knew right away that these two are telling the truth. They are truly the representatives of Allah, because only the representative of Allah would do a good deed, would cure a sick person and never ask for anything in return. So Habib immediately became a heartfelt and ardent believer, and he was sincere and true in his faith. Now in Majma al-Bayan, the story continues that these two disciples then left the company of Habib and they proceeded to the town. And the narration now here varies that one of two things happened, that these two people gathered in the town of the polytheists in Antioch and started preaching. The people became offended about hearing about one God and they took them to the king and the king arrested them. Another says that the king entered the marketplace and he saw that these two did not bow before the idols, and the king became angry and threw them into prison. And then he ordered for them to be given 100 lashes. And then after that punishment, 100 lashes or however many lashes, they went back to prison. When Nabi Isa heard that two of his disciples had been put into prison in Antioch by a king who was a pagan king who was refusing to listen to their message, Nabi Isa sent the leader of the Hawariyun, who is known as Simon or Shamun, to the city of Antioch. Simon, when he comes to the city of Antioch, he knows that his two brothers, his two friends, the two disciples are in prison. He takes a different approach. He gets friendly with the wazirs of the king, the guides and the counselors of the king, and he gets friendly with them until the counselors of the king decide that, hey, Simon is an important person, we should introduce him to the king. So they take Simon to the king. The king sees the akhlaq, the behavior, the knowledge, and the wisdom of Simon and becomes very impressed by him. Simon asks him, after he's gained the trust of the king, he says, King, it's noted that two men came to you preaching a new religion and that you've thrown them into jail. The king says, yes, that's true. Simon says, did you hear what they had to say before you threw them in jail? Have you heard what their comments were? And the king replies, he says, no, I didn't. My anger prevented me from listening to anything they had to say. I immediately punished them and threw them into prison. Simon says, why don't we listen to what they have to say? Bring them out and we'll have a debate with them and we'll see if we're on the right path or if they're on the right path. The king, looking at the wisdom of this man and looking at the interest he had in his character, says, okay, let's give it a try. When the two disciples of Nabi Isa come out, they recognize Simon immediately. They say, oh, this is our friend, he's here to help us. But they hide their familiarity with them. So Simon asks the two men who are pretending not to know him, he says, what do you believe? They said, we believe in one God and we are sent as messengers to this town to invite the people and to admonish them to leave their evil ways and come to the path of the one true God. Simon says, do you have any abilities that you can perform to prove this? They say, yes, we can cure the blind, heal the sick. Simon says, okay. He turns to the king and he says, now, king, let's test and see if they're telling the truth. Do you have two blind men who have never seen in their life, they've never seen anything in their life, they're blind from birth? Bring them before us. The king has them brought before. And Simon says, now you two pray to cure this one and I'll pray to cure this one. So the two disciples pray and the blind man is cured. MashaAllah, his sight returns and he says, and they know this is the first time he can see in his life. Simon turns and says, now, king, I will pray and we'll see if this man is cured. And Simon prays and the man is cured. And he says, king, look, I have performed a miracle equal to them. Now, in some narrations, it says that Simon says, look, our God has cured him too. We don't believe this. Rather, what we say is that Simon used eloquence to show not that he was worshipping the same God as the king, but that he was on the same God, he was on the same side as the king, and the other two are on another side. So he uses the statement very cleverly. He says, look, king, they prayed to their God and he was cured, and look, I prayed and he was cured. We are now equal in miracles. He says, yeah. Simon says, now bring paralyzed men who have been paralyzed for their entire life. They brought two men who were paralyzed for their entire life. And he says to them, pray and see if this man is healed. They prayed, the two disciples prayed, and the man was cured. Simon says, O king, now I will pray. Simon prayed, and the paralyzed man was cured. He said, look, king, our paralyzed man is cured too. We have equaled them in this miracle as well. He says, but their king, there is one miracle that cannot be performed. And the king says, what's that? He says, the raising of the dead. O king, if these two can claim to raise the dead, then I will follow their religion, and you should too. King says, really? He says, okay. Simon turns to the two disciples. He says, it has been said that this king has a son who has passed away. I want you to pray to your God to see if he will raise this son from the dead. And the two disciples, they say, okay, they make dua, they pray, they turn around, they say to the king, go to his grave now, he'll be there. The king and the court proceed to the grave of his son, and they see his son now standing alive, shaking the dust and dirt out of his hair and standing up. And the king says, what happened to you? And the son replies, he says, oh, father, I was dead. And I saw that two men came before the glory of God and prayed to have me return to life, and Allah brought me back to life. The king says, if you saw these two men, would you recognize them? And the son says, yes, I would definitely recognize them. So the king took his entire court and all of the people of the village and lined them up in a row and included the two disciples of Nabi Isa. And the man began walking in front of the row, and first he identified one of them and he said, this is one. And then he kept walking until he then found the other one. He said, this is the other one. And he correctly identified the two disciples of Nabi Isa to show that the dua of the disciples of Nabi Isa was sufficient to bring him back to life. Now Simon turned to the king. He says, O king, this is a great proof that even I cannot replicate. I now follow the same God as these two follow. Now in the references that Allama Majlisi has in Bihar al-Anwar, that upon seeing this, the king said, wow, you're right. And he accepted Islam as well too, and made the entire nation Muslim. However, in Majmu' al-Bayan, this king follows the same logic as Fir'aun. That Fir'aun, when he had the indisputable proofs put before his hands, he still rejected from inside of himself. And in Majmu' al-Bayan, the story continues that this king, upon seeing his son brought back to life, and now seeing Simon joining the other two, became suspicious and said, no, you're all lying. I don't believe any of you. Kill all three of them. And the villagers then take Simon and the two disciples to the center of the city, and they intend to kill them. As they're about to kill these two men is where this verse number 20 of Surah Yaseen comes and says, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. That in this instance was when the news reached Habib al-Najjar that the messengers and disciples of Nabi Isa were about to be killed in his town, that he came running from the far part away of the city. Remember, he was outside at the outskirts of the city. He came running to his people, saying to them, "O my people, follow the messengers, listen to these messengers." And then at this point in time, it says that the king turned to him and he says, "Are you intending to believe them? Do you believe these people?" Because Habib was one of the residents of the city, so the king knew him. So the king says, "You too? You're going to be following them? Do you believe them?" And this is where verse 21 now comes in, that Habib replies to the king, "Ittabi'u man la yas'alukum ajran wa hum muhtadun." O king, I will follow him who does not ask for a reward. He cured my son. He asked me for no reward. He's brought your son back to life. He asked for no reward. They are certainly the followers of the right path. So the king turns to him and he says, "Oh Habib, will you give up the idols that we've worshipped all our life because of the tricks of these men?" And Habib now replies in verse number 22 is the reply of Habib. He says, وَمَا لِي لَا أَعْبُدُ الَّذِي فَطَرَنِي وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. He replies, he says, what reason do I have, O king, not to worship, that I should not serve the one who brought me into existence? I will only worship that God who brought me into existence. I won't worship any idol or anything else. And certainly to that God is my return. O king, your child returned to that God. Ask him what he saw. And he'll tell you the same thing, that to him is our return. Why then should I, Habib, worship anyone other than that one true God? Though you, the king, are threatening me and questioning me in a threatening fashion, Habib sticks to his iman, sticks to his faith. Which is why he then continues and the king threatens him. He says, you're not going to believe in these idols? He says, أَأَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِهِ آلِهَةً أَن يُرِدْنِ الرَّحْمَنُ بِضُرٍّ لَا تُغْنِي عَنِّي شَفَاعَتُهُم شَيْئًا وَلَا يُنْقِذُونَ. He says, what? Shall I follow an idol? Should I follow besides him whose intercession, if the beneficent of Allah should desire to afflict me with harm, shall not avail me even a little bit, nor shall they be able to deliver me? So Habib is now asking the practical question. He says, "O king, you're insisting that I follow an idol, when an idol has no ability, has no shifa, has no ability to help me overcome the trials and difficulties in life that would have befallen me if I believed in anyone other than Allah." One of the points that we can assume that Habib is trying to make here is that, "O king, didn't you pray to the idols for your son to be raised?" We can imagine this was the conversation that was being had. And Habib was saying, didn't you imagine that those idols that you prayed to, did they ever raise your son? But now these disciples, they came, and as soon as they prayed, your son was raised. The trial that Allah put you under, did those idols help you at all? Were they any assistance to you? They possess no shifa'ah. They can't deliver me from the trials that Allah puts me under. So then why should I believe in them? Why should you believe in them? Habib is now giving the rhetorical question. Allah is showing the speech and the kalam of Habib. Look at how Allah has raised the status of this person, that his speech is given to us as a source of guidance and instruction. And the same thing, that don't ever keep faith in anyone other than Allah, and keep your faith in Allah firm. Because if Allah is the one who puts the trial on you, how can anyone give you intercession or guidance or assistance in that trial other than Allah? Finally he says, Inni idhan lafi dhalalin mubin. Habib finishes, he says, if I was to be like you and believe in idols who can't help me overcome the trials of Allah, Inni idhan lafi dhalalin mubin. That if I did that, then I would certainly be in dhalal. Dhalal is error, being lost. Remember in Surah Fatiha, we recited it there too. وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ, those who have gone astray. Habib is saying that certainly if I did what you're suggesting and worship these idols, who did nothing for you, helped you in no way, they can't defend themselves, they didn't raise your son from the dead. He says, Inni idhan lafi dhalalin mubin. Then I would certainly be in manifest error as well too. I would certainly be gone wrong, and there would be no doubt about me being wrong. Inshallah, we'll continue our discussion from here next week as the story of Habib continues and his conversation with the king and the consequences of what happens from here between the king and Habib continue to unfold. Inshallah, we look forward to having this conversation next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Assalamu alayka ya Rasul Allah. Assalamu alayka ya Nabi Allah. Assalamu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. Assalamu alayka ya Sayyid al-Wasiyyin. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين أيها الشهيد بكربلاء. السلام على 9 المعصومين من ذريتك علي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي الباقر وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي التقي الجواد وعلي بن محمد النقي الهادي والحسن بن علي العسكري. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والأمر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وجعلنا من أنصارك وأعوانك ورحمة الله وبركاته.